Hello and welcome to Business India with me Tarun. The bilateral trade between India and Japan has increased from $4 billion in 1999 to $14.5 billion in 2016. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's recent visit to Japan has given a new vigor to the special strategic and global partnership between the two countries. Both countries have identified defense, nuclear energy as an important area of cooperation. India and Japan are also looking at cooperation on second high-speed rail project that is being planned. We discussed this issue today with Ambassador Bhaskar Balakrishnan and Ambassador Ashok Sajanar. I'll request Ashok Sajanar to make his opening comments on the emerging relationship between India and Japan.
Thank you very much, Tarun. Since you have referred to the visit of the Prime Minister to Japan from the 10th to the 12th of this month, let me identify a few points in which discussions were held, some areas, and our relationship has been taken forward. Number one, of course, is the civil nuclear cooperation deal. And of course, India has signed such an agreement with a large number of other countries earlier. But what makes this deal with this agreement with Japan particularly significant is the fact, number one, that Japan is the only country which has been attacked by atom bombs during the Second World War. Hiroshima, Nagasaki, 6th and 9th of August 1945. So there has been great hesitation, there has been great reluctance on the part of Japan to enter into a nuclear deal with a country that has not signed the Non-proliferation treaty. So this is very, very significant. There's the only non-NPT country that Japan has signed this agreement. Discussions have been going on for the last 6-7 years, so that is a great achievement. The other achievement, of course, is on what you mentioned on the high-speed rail, the Shinkansen, from Mumbai to Ahmedabad, and there is a timeline that has been set up for that. The third aspect that I could possibly mention is on counterterrorism. I think here it would be useful and important to remember that Japan has had good relations with Pakistan because it has seen that American forces have been in Afghanistan, so it thought that Pakistan is an important instrument in terms of restoring peace and stability and security in Afghanistan. But this is for the first time that Japan has severely criticized and castigated Pakistan terrorism and asked it not to take action.
Ambassador Sajanar, you are hinting at India's growing closeness with Japan and its effect on Japanese reactions with Pakistan. Are you alluding to that?
Yes, I think as I mentioned, for the first time this whole issue about counterterrorism has been mentioned in the bilateral statement with Japan, and I think this is a big advance. This is a huge advance.
Okay. Ambassador Bhaskar Balakrishnan, your opening comments on India-Japan emerging relations and also your reaction to Ambassador Sajanar's statement on Japan's stance towards Pakistan.
Well, overall, the whole this is the 11th summit between India-Japan summit, and overall the momentum generated in the past summits has been sustained, and the cooperation has widened. About 10 agreements were signed in different fields, including one on civil nuclear cooperation. I will come to that a little later. So the general picture is that of a rapidly growing, multifaceted, multidimensional cooperation with Japan on the basis of mutual benefit and respect in all fields. Coming to the specific mention in the joint statement, for the first time there is a specific mention in the joint statement about bringing to justice the victims of the perpetrators of the terrorist attacks in Mumbai and Pathankot. So the joint statement refers to both these by name, and it's a fairly strong joint statement on the need to stop terrorism and cut off support in all ways. There are other things in the joint statement which also are reflective of the convergence between the two countries, especially on the need to have a rule-bound international law framework applicable to maritime security. India, Japan and the United States, and as well as India, Japan, Australia will be cooperating in maritime security matters, so that is also there. And then of course there is a lot of there is mention of defense industry cooperation. with Japan. Several agreements are being looked at, including purchase of amphibious aircraft. So the defense sector is likely to witness Indo-Japanese industrial activity, hopefully in the near future. The high speed and surface transport has already been mentioned by Ambassador Sajana. In addition, there is emphasis on skill development, cooperation in the field of space, in the field of earth sciences, science and technology, and cultural cooperation. The easing of visa regimes between the two countries is also welcomed, and I think further steps may occur in that. And then this is a fairly elaborate joint statement which covers a lot of ground.
Okay. So I take your point, Ambassador Sajanar. They say after the Fukushima incident, the Japanese nuclear industry was suffering, but our civil nuclear agreement with India will revive the industry. More so, not even the Japanese industry, but also the American industry, due to huge stakes that the Japanese companies have in Westinghouse and some other companies. How do you see this emerging relationship, which in fact helps Japan, and also they say India's dependence on Russia and France also reduces with this civil nuclear cooperation agreement?
You are very right. Number one, it is definitely going to help Japan because, as you mentioned, after the 2011 Fukushima tragedy, there has been the focus on nuclear energy in Japan has been coming down. So it's been looking for foreign markets. Of course, as far as India is concerned, our needs are enormous. I will not go so far as to say that our dependence on or our need or requirement to engage with France and Russia will come down, because if you look at our current production capacity, it is in the range of about 5.3 gigawatts, and the government has announced that we are going to increase it to about 20 gigawatts by 2020 and take it to about 62 gigawatts by 2032. Now these are very, very ambitious figures, and we need support from all sides. And of course, it is also to meet our energy requirement, energy demand, because India is a highly energy deficient country, but it is also, it will be clean energy and it will also be cheap energy, because whatever the requirements are, it will not be business as usual in terms of reliance on fossil fuels, on coal, on gas, on oil. As you are aware, we import about 80% of our oil requirements. We import large quantities of coal and gas also. So environmentally, the fossil fuels are not good. So we need to move away from there. So in that sense, nuclear energy, and particularly in the context of the intended national contributions, determined contributions that we had given for the sustainability development goals. So there nuclear energy will play a very important part.
Okay.
Another aspect that, if you permit, Tarun, that I could mention is that along with this, number one, it will be sending a signal to China that India is a non-NPT signatory, and the first non-NPT signatory with which Japan is signing an agreement.
Yes.
The other is that in the joint statement, there is a very categorical reference to support by Japan to India for membership of NSG.
Yes.
And of course, the other Wassenaar agreement and the Australia group membership. So I think that is also designed to send a very clear and a very strong message to China. Of course, in addition to what is contained in the joint statement about regional collaboration on managing regional issues and the South China Sea, etc. I think we will come to that a little later. But in this context, I want to particularly underline and emphasize that it will be a message in terms of Japan's support of our membership of NSG, and also signing the civilian nuclear deal, because that has Japan, as I mentioned earlier, has taken such a long time in coming on board on this issue.
Okay, I take your point, Ambassador Bhaskar Balakrishnan. Now, I would want to ask you, the CPEC, or the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, has envisaged investments of $46 billion. They say Japan has also a program called the Partnership for Quality Infrastructure and other programs under which it is giving assistance to the Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor and the Chennai-Bangalore industrial corridor. Now it is talked that unless India has high quality infrastructure, the FDI flows that we want to come in this country would not be reality, and India could also not integrate itself into the global value chains. Do you see that Japan and India will continue to come closer as Pakistan and China continue to come closer on economic issues? How do you see this happening in the next decade or so?
Well, the China-Pakistan economic corridor is basically an arrangement between completely unequal partners. The Chinese have literally financed this thing through loans which Pakistan will have to repay.
Yes.
Secondly, the free trade agreement has resulted in Chinese goods flooding the Pakistani market, and Pakistani industry is closing down, and with the result of loss of jobs.
Yes.
Some Pakistani writers even go so far as to say that Pakistan is becoming an economic colony of the Chinese.
Yes.
So our model of cooperation with Japan is totally different. We are far more
On an
equal
footing?
partners. Of course, yes, we have a long way to go. Chennai Bangalore industrial corridor, as well as the Delhi-Mumbai industrial corridor, because we have a decentralized system. The state governments are involved heavily in a lot of projects and infrastructure implementation.
Yes.
It is the center alone cannot do everything in our system. They have to partner with the states. So there is a long way to go, but I think overall we have made a good beginning. Now, coming to the nuclear deal, there is something very special about Japan, and that is Japan Steel Works is the only company in the world which can manufacture these large, very large reactor pressure vessels.
Okay.
These are reactor pressure vessels made of steel, which are something like 600 tons, and they are used in the pressurized water reactors like Kudankulam or Areva or Westinghouse. The Japanese steel works, they make these vessels out of a single unit of high quality steel without any welding. So they have a virtual monopoly over this. Other companies are coming up in Korea, China, Russia and France, and even Larsen and Toubro. We are also trying to develop this capacity, but not yet.
Not yet.
So, but the Japanese are caught in one situation. They have a monopoly. Only 4 or 5 of these can be built in a year, these
Yes.
reactor vessels. They are very, very heavy. And so we need these, for Areva needs them, as well as Westinghouse needs these vessels. So that's why the Japanese conclusion of the civil nuclear agreement is very important, to enable Areva and Westinghouse to carry out their projects. Otherwise it will be only the Russians who can do it.
Ambassador Balakrishnan, since you mentioned FTAs, I'll go across to Ambassador Sajana to ask him, sir, FTAs, Indian business leaders of multinational companies operating out of India too have raised issues with the DG safeguards with the Ministry of Commerce on India-Japan FTA, because they say that they are not yet as competitive, you know, to even, you know, face the surge of Japanese imports as duties come down to near zero levels in 2021. How do you see this point made by the Indian industry? Do you think it will be a sore point in the whole relationship?
I don't think it will be a sore point in the whole relationship, because you know, some problems, some difficulties, some issues are bound to creep up, because you know there has to be, whenever an FTA is signed or whenever an agreement of this is signed, you know, there are certain adjustments that are required by the industries on both sides. And we have seen that that when the FTA with ASEAN was signed, then of course the tariffs in ASEAN were much lower. We had to bring down our tariffs considerably. So you know that experience was not a very happy one, because our imports increased, but our exports did not increase in the same manner. So now I'm just giving you the example of ASEAN, which would also be valid and relevant for Japan, because ASEAN is a manufacturing set of countries. So their manufacturers came to India, but we have an advantage in services. So in 2014, when we have signed the agreement with ASEAN on services and investments, and once that comes into play, once that gets implemented, if not later this year, early next year, then I think India is going to make up for that. Now, in the case of Japan also, we have an advantage in services. There is a huge demographic advantage that India has. If you look at the Japanese economy, they have more than 25% of their population above the age of 65 years. So, you know, in terms of demographics, India has a great advantage. In terms of services, I've already mentioned that India has a great advantage. And what was being mentioned earlier, Ambassador Balakrishnan mentioned, in terms of Make in India and in terms of skilling India, you know, that also is a way to establish, to invest more in India and have make this become a manufacturing hub, so to say. So I think there are other initiatives that are being taken, but by and large the SIPA that has been signed, the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement that has been signed between India and Japan in 2011, that has by and large been moving fairly well, moving successfully. And now with this, you know, there is the Japan-India Institute of Management. There will be training of 30,000 Indians in Japanese practices, in Japanese style of operations. And I think that is definitely going to help us in creating more of manufacturing in our own country. And so, and in Japanese investment also coming into the country will definitely be helpful
I
in
take
that
your point.
regard.
I'm going across to Ambassador Bhaskar Balakrishnan. Now, two questions, sir, I would like to ask you. A would be that take the example of automobiles. Recently, in the run-up to the US presidential election campaign, it was Donald Trump who made a statement that Japanese cars are flooding the American market, and virtually can you see any Chevrolet on Tokyo's roads? None. So he was alluding to the fact that Japanese has been successful in exporting automobiles. Same case in India. Maruti still remains India's largest, Maruti Suzuki remains India's largest automobile producer, virtual monopoly. You know, it controls more than excess of 50% of the automobile market. Now, recently there was 2 or 3 issues which were raised in various parliamentary committees. The first being when the Indian companies said that high grade steel should be used from, made and manufactured by Indian companies for auto. It shouldn't be imported from, say, a South Korea or a Japan. Now, Japanese companies, including the Japanese foreign affairs establishment, they reached out to the Indian government. They told them that we have committed and made investments for 30 years in Japan in setting up these plants, and the kind of steel that is required will have to be imported for Suzuki to use, to other companies to use. Now, as India grows and industrializes, these points of what you can say conflicts are only going to rise. Steel is only one point. There are going to be other issues. A lot of other spare parts are imported that are used in automobiles. Do you see these issues going to be pain points in this relationship as India industrializes more and more?
No, obviously there is in every country, basically business enterprises, the national ones and the foreign ones, they are competing for various products and services. So there will always be a tendency of national businesses to get the governments to impose restrictions on foreign products in order to protect their competitive position or to bolster it. Now, generally speaking, the government should avoid getting into this because it does not help in the long run. If you introduce special tariffs and special import barriers, that is only going to harm you, because ultimately you have to also export in the international market to survive.
Yes.
Of course, we have a large domestic market, so we can get away with it for a while. But ultimately, you have to produce a product or a service which is competitive globally.
Yes.
And if you can do that, then you don't really have to worry about you know, the foreign companies coming in. In fact, that competition does help you. It also helps the consumer.
Okay.
So you know, these issues will come up. There will always be protectionist appeals made by domestic industry to do this. Whenever there is an FTA, there will always be domestic players who will say we are being hurt. Now, it's a different thing when it comes to dumping.
Yes.
When you have dumping of products, there the domestic industries who are affected, they have to be vigilant.
Yes.
They have to spend some money and do their own research and come up with the evidence for dumping and submit it to the Director General of Anti-Dumping.
Yes.
If the case. Now, that is where we need to do more if we really want to protect ourselves, for example, from Chinese
take your point,
imports.
sir, and on this point I'll draw in Ambassador Sajjanar into the debate. Sir, when you see the R&D spending of Indian companies is comparatively one of the lowest in the world. we get good transfer technology, we manufacture in India and sell to our people. Now Japan is one of the world's leading investors in R&D behind the United States of America. Now with these two kind of partners with differently skill sets, we like to get technology ready made, we buy it and produce, we've got a good big home market that can actually consume all what we produce, and there is a Japan who's who's leading in R&D. How do you see these two people working together?
There is a very significant number, I would say, in India also, that is looking for quality products. It's not only the price that matters, and I think we have seen it here in our own country. If you look at some of the newer technologies that they might have been priced a little more than what is available normally. And I'll give you an example from a country that I was in earlier, that we have imported Volvo buses from Sweden.
Yes.
And there it was always thought that since we have the Tata and we have the Ashok Leyland, and the quality and their prices is much cheaper. So these Volvo buses would really not be able to withstand the competition. But this has been proved wrong, because you have such a large number of it. Started, of course, from South India, from Bengaluru and other places, but then it has become popular on intercity routes across the country.
Now,
and the prices are more, but the people are willing to pay. So there is a clientele, and I think we need to cater to such clientele also. And it doesn't need to be absolutely, of course, that is the public transportation system that has definitely to be taken care of. But I think there is room for that, and we should be willing to cater to that also.
In conclusion, even though there are a bit pain points, as your final closing comments, very quickly, Ambassador Balakrishnan, how do you see this relationship growing from say $14.5 billion now? What is your kind of what do you feel, what happens in the next say 5 or 7 years from now? Where is this relationship headed?
Well, a small word about the figures. If you look at the bilateral trade, it peaked in 2008.
Yes.
Thereafter it dropped. So what you're talking about is below what it reached in 2008.
Okay.
Similarly, investment flows peaked at about FDI from Japan was about 5.6 billion. That's again 2008.
Yes.
Thereafter it dropped.
Yes.
So of course Japan is what we get by way of investment and trade with Japan depends on global economic conditions as well. But we can do our best to reach the target of 35 billion. There's a lot of room ahead if we get our act together and our systems working.
Okay. So
now,
you are
talking about R&D,
yes,
we are spending far below the recommended norm of 2% of GDP on R&D.
Yes.
There are a small fraction of that. And we don't have a well-developed R&D S&T ecosystem,
yes,
in which the private sector, the academic institutions and the government all, as well as the users, are all part of that ecosystem. That is still developing in India.
Okay, I take your point. Closing comments very quickly from Ambassador Sajjanar on these issues.
I think it's a win-win relationship, and particularly as in the context of the changing geopolitical situation, I think there are great possibilities for collaboration between the two countries, whether it is in the area of civil nuclear cooperation, whether it is in the area of counterterrorism, in the area of defense, in the area of trade and investment, economic partnership, and also in terms of collaboration when we are talking about maintaining peace and security of the seas, of the maritime resources, particularly in view of the assertive nature of behavior of China, the more bellicose and the belligerent behavior of China in recent years. And I think we have a long, we can further strengthen
on this
our
note, we end this discussion today. We'll continue the India and Japan trade discussions in our next episode. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us on today's discussion of Business India. Thank you.